that's a different story. So, all right, well, we're going to go ahead and move on, and as people come back in, we'll incorporate them in. From here, we went to Chaco Canyon, which on a map doesn't look like it's really far, but it's really far. Okay? And it's really far through not a lot of space. But to leave, when we left Mesa Verde, we went back through Cortez and then headed south. And there's a whole series of these volcanic plugs that go about 150 miles to the south. And they're not evenly spaced, but they all look pretty much like this. But again, look at the land around it. All of a sudden, as soon as you come off the mesa, this is still Mesa Verde. This is the south side of Mesa Verde. You are in this absolute desert environment. There's still a lot of grass. This is all rangeland today. There's big cattle ranches and stuff like that here, but it's very interesting land. And one of the features that you can see, and again, you see the smoke from California here, they kept telling us from the top of Mesa Verde, you can see shiprock. And we're looking out there and I don't see shiprock because it was covered in smoke, but eventually it did clear. We're still actually probably 50 miles from shiprock here. And I like shiprock because I happen to like the Tony Hillerman novels. Some of you are familiar with those. They take place on the Navajo Reservation, the Navajo police and all that. And they're always going to shiprock. So we went through shiprock, and I'm not sure why anybody goes to shiprock necessarily, but except that it's there. But that shiprock, but look at the land, and this is really what I took the picture, not just to get shiprock, but the land here is very, very stark. And it is occupied. Some of it is native land, some of it is not. Okay, but it's very, very stark land, and there are hundreds of miles of this. When we drove up from Texas back to Santa Fe, there was probably 320 miles that looked exactly like this. Okay? And the road was dead straight, so you better have company in the car or you're in trouble. This is about as close as we got to Shiprock. We're actually in the village of Shiprock here. That's still about 15 miles away. So it really is a very unique feature that was very prominent in native legend and native stories. We didn't take the side trip because it would have been another hour out of our way. But I have seen shiprock now, and so have you. So there we are. Where we were headed to is Chaco Canyon. And Chaco Canyon is incredibly isolated and was then, too. You had to want to go there, and you definitely have to want to go there now. According to all the directions, you go to Nageezi and turn right. Well, there's nothing in Nageezi. Okay? There's nothing there. There's a sign, Nageezi, but there's not a building in sight. So at one time, there was probably something there. Now there's not. It's a 21-mile drive from there into Chaco Canyon. And this is the actual entrance to the canyon. This Frajada Butte here, this is where the Sun Dagger was. And we really wanted to go see the Sun Dagger, which is on this side. It's up in, there's a cave up in here. They were not allowing that hike because it was too hot. And there's no water or anything like that. And again, even though we're experienced hikers, they couldn't have really stopped us. But they basically saying, we'd rather you not do that. So we played games and we didn't do that. But it's an incredibly isolated site. This is actually looking up the canyon. And there's really nothing near it. Nothing quite like it. There's desert for miles in any direction. And again, it's 21 miles into the park. 16 of those miles are unpaved. And this is kind of a double-edged sword in this park. They do that on purpose because this is an incredibly sensitive archaeological site. And it's very exposed. Even though it's out there in the middle of nowhere, there's almost no way to patrol it. So they make it isolated. The other side of that is because it's isolated, it has a very low visitation rate, under 50,000 a year. And because it has under 50,000 a year, it's at the bottom of the pecking order for money for the national park system. And it needs it desperately. They really need, the signage is terrible. It's old. It really isn't accurate. They do need some repair. There's the visitor center is quite nice. The staff actually lives there because the nearest hotel is 120 miles away. So you're going to go here and camp, or you're just going to stop for an afternoon and move on. Campground is really excellent, by the way, except there's no water at the campground. You have to go up to the visitor center to get water, which is about 3 miles away. And coyotes go wandering through your camp at night, and so we can hear them actually outside our tent sniffing away. It's like, okay, that's interesting. So, but it's very, very stark. But this is someplace I've been reading about since I was probably 10 years old. So this was an exciting place to be. This was a very large ritual center. There are 16 what they call great houses here, and then there were around, there's the remains of about 40 small villages that are across the valley from the great houses. These great houses were exactly that. They were enormous houses. The largest is called Pueblo Bonito. When it was in its prime, it had 600 rooms in it, but there's only evidence that about 40 people lived there. So this was a site that you apparently came to, did whatever rituals needed to be done, and then went back to wherever you were from. And there are ritual roads that lead to these sites, some of which are over 60 miles long. They are absolutely dead straight. They make no variation whatsoever for geography. So if you're walking on one of these highways into the Chaco Canyon area and there's a huge boulder in the way, they cut steps in the stone, so that you would not have to vary your path. In some cases they're wide, but as they get closer and closer to the site, they tend to narrow, and you can only get about 3 people across when you start approaching the site. And obviously these were engineered on purpose. So there was some very significant ritualism that went with this site to these various great houses. The roads come in from the 4 cardinal directions, and then there are side roads that lead you into those roads rather than lead you in from the quarter directions. So it's fascinating. And we have absolutely no idea what happened in here because there's very little remains in here. The 40 people or so, there are some very high status burials, not very many of them. And they're buried with things that are very exotic. Copper bells from Mexico, red macaw feathers, which would also come from Mexico, turquoise that they can trace. They know some of it came from Arizona, some of it came from further north into New Mexico, and so this was trade, or at least the giving of gifts would have been very important in this site. Probably no direct contact with Mexico. That there's no sign, no evidence of that. So this was probably secondary or tertiary trade. So exotic birds might have been something that was traded. So that might have been part of the ritual. We're not sure. It would seem that construction was part of the ritual. Again, if you only have about 40 people in permanent residence in any of these places, probably a priestly class, and the villages across the way are farming villages that only had 20 or 30 people in them as well. Who builds a 600-room, 5-story building? It's one of 16. And so the thought is that perhaps young men, that would have been probably the logical thing at the time, would have owed some of their time to this site, and they would have been in the construction. And they also had to bring their wood with them. There's no wood here. The nearest wood, 60 miles away. And yet there are tens of thousands of logs and smaller logs here to build these sites. And they each would have had to have been carried in from at least 60 miles. And some of these large ones are big. And if they were cut, generally you didn't cut them and carry them green. They're too heavy. Generally what you do is you cut them, leave them for a year, and then carry them. If something that weighs a ton, fallen weight, will actually lose sometimes half a ton or more and when it dries out. But this is actually original. It's so dry there that this is not reconstruction. These are actually 1,000-year-old logs. This one is cut. They didn't have anything that could cut that clean. This is where they've done some of that dendrochronology, trying to figure out how old this tree actually was. This one was from about 1100 AD. So this site. And you can see the architecture. You basically put a few large logs across and then laid in smaller ones. And this is your ceiling and the floor for the next people above you. Okay, and so again, they're spread all over. There are tens of thousands of these logs. This is a typical room. Again, you can see Carl, he's about 5'9", 5'10" or so. But look at the very fine masonry in this, okay, especially compared to the cliff dwellings, which were built very quickly. This was not. This was built over time. And again, as a ritual site, perhaps with a lot more care. But this is incredibly fine work. And these are all cut stones. This is not adobe. Okay, these are not mud bricks. Okay, this is all cut stone. And a lot of it cut right out of the cliffs right next door, which are a soft sandstone. Okay, and so this is important. You can see this is where eventually they do dry out and collapse. This is where that floor would have been. See, these would have been those. And this is where the two major, and there are actually 4 of these in this room. And then this is somebody else's door up here. So you had to climb on roofs and stuff. There were actually a couple places where you could do that, where they've kept the structures firm enough so that as a tourist you can actually see what that was like. But again, look at the exceptional masonry in this. This takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of hands. So again, the presumption is that people came in here, perhaps in part, to build the sites and then to do whatever rituals were necessary. There's no question that this is a ritual site. This was not a residence site. It was never a residence site. That type of debris that you would find in a residence site just is not there. The trash pits if you had 600 rooms, presumably you could have 1,000 people there. They would have an enormous trash pit. It's not there. It's not there. The type of stuff they find in the rooms is the type of stuff that in our culture you'd find in a motel room. People never leave. You don't see big stuff. You don't see permanent stuff. People leave their watches. They might leave their wallet. They might leave a pair of shoes. So that's exactly what you find in most of these rooms. So these were places that were visited and then left. And so probably seasonally as well. The walls are interesting. Almost all of the great houses are D-shaped. Some of them are a little bit of variation here or there. But the straight walls, no matter where they are, line up with some astral event. It might be the rising and setting of the moon at the solstices. It might be the rising or setting of certain star clusters. It might be the rising and setting of the sun at certain times of the year. But they're all faced in that direction on purpose. And these walls are absolutely dead straight. If you put a level on this thing, that bubble will be right in the middle. So the architecture and the ability to build were spectacular. This is a contemporaneous site to Mesa Verde. They are occupied at exactly the same time period. Reached their peak roughly around 1,000 or so, modern era. And by 1275, they're abandoned. This site, however, is reoccupied for about 100 years as a residence. It wasn't a ritual site anymore. Somebody wandering through said, wow, buildings, let's live in them. So for about 100 years, they do. Around the late 1400s into the early 1500s, and then it's abandoned again. Because it really is isolated. You're not really near anything. There are petroglyphs here all over the place. There's a wall, particularly between some of the great houses, that's called Petroglyph Wall. And here you can see what's probably a crane, a dog or a coyote, perhaps, and then down here what looks like a duck. There are again the same sorts of strange creatures. You see lots of these. This is a natural hole, by the way. That was not drilled in there. And this might be a Kokopelli figure here. It's hard to say whether that's natural or that might have been carved at one point. But there are just dozens of them spread out along the cliff walls as you go between the great houses. So again, ritual significance, good question. No idea. And again, lots and lots of handprints. This is what they look like. This is Pueblo Bonito. And again, there's a person standing here conveniently for us. In 1941, a huge portion of the cliff came down and destroyed about 10% of Pueblo Bonito. And it is still in danger. You can see this crack right here. This is going to come down. There is no way to prevent it from falling. Now, whether it falls this year, 150 years from now, no way to tell. But they actually, most of these are built tucked right up at the edge of the canyon walls. So they're imperiled sites, and there's no question about that. So they're trying as hard as they can to preserve as much as they can and do as much archaeological work as they can before disaster strikes some of these places. Okay, and when we walked, we did the trail above. You can see there are massive cracks above as well. So this is some of these are endangered because it's such an isolated site, and because it has low visitation. They allow things here that no other site in the national park system would ever allow. You are never going to see a trail in the national park system that looks like that. Okay, never, ever, ever. Okay, and this was the trail to get to the top. You climbed about 200 feet through that to get to the top of the mesas, and it was a great trail. And it was actually a lot of fun going through all these, squeezing through these places. You did actually have to watch rattlesnakes here because they are there, but there's no sign here telling you that. So apparently if you get bit, it's your own fault here. But they did tell you that as you're climbing up this, and we did this first thing in the morning, as you're climbing up that, just be careful where you put your hands. Don't put your hands anywhere that you can't see. Okay? And so that made climbing in some of these places kind of interesting. So you throw rocks up there first just to see, make sure nothing's there. But it was really quite a climb. You come up this way and go through these little things. But when you make it to the top, it is fascinating at the top. This was also part of that big underground, big inland sea. And when we got up to the top, we kept seeing these things. And that, to me, being here in the east, would indicate iron. It's rust-colored and all that sort of stuff, that there's somehow iron veins. That's what you see in the Adirondacks. You see it to a lesser degree down in the Catskills. They're not. They're shrimp burrows. That shrimp have made these. Some of them are 2 and 3 feet long. We also found shark's teeth in some of the stone, and there's indication of other shell fossils and things like that. So this was part of the ocean floor, was raised up through tectonic activity, and now is flat and is part of the landscape. So it was really interesting. We also found a lot of human-made structures. Again, there were some of those same potholes that would have stored water or perhaps been used for cooking if you were up here. But we saw above almost every great house, there was a human-made dam of some sort to collect runoff water and dump it right down into the great house. So it was just an added way to get some water because there's a definite seasonal wet and a definite seasonal dry. And so you needed to store water somehow in order to sustain life. And this is Pueblo Menino from above. You can see that very definitive D structure, D shape. This would have been at one time 5 stories tall. Obviously, these are modern braces to try to keep that wall steady. But one of the features here are the large number of kivas. There are actually 15 in this site here. So apparently you came and performed certain rituals inside these kivas. These also have the wall niches, where there are probably slits in the roof for various times of the year. So the sun would come in, strike a niche, and again, whether there was an offering of some sort, perhaps an icon in them, we don't know. It's only partially been restored. Some of the bricks have been taken away for other purposes by later groups, things like that, but just spectacular. The residences were all across here, and usually where you had an area like this, because there's seep in here. There was water in here. Villages were small, again, 30, 40 people maybe, although one of the largest, in fact, it is the largest kiva, is actually across in one of the small villages. So there must have been something really important about that site. The village is very average, it's built with care, but not nearly with the masonry that this is, but that kiva is. And so there was something special about that particular site. This, again, you see one out in the middle here. That's unusual. There's a seasonal stream that runs in the center. The water table's higher there, but there are no wells, or it's too deep for that. But this is what the valley looks like. And again, the nearest wood source is over 60 miles away. So it's just an incredible site. And again, take a look. This is our car here, so you can see how far up you are and what the landscape looks like. The campground is way down at this end where the entrance is. It's about maybe 10 miles long from one end to the other, but it is literally this isolated, even today. Again, great houses. You can see, again, kivas here, both built up and pits. I'm not sure what the significance is or what the difference is, but obviously, again, a ritual site. And the spread. This one was quite large and had about 24 niches in it for various rituals throughout the year. And again, very, very large one here. But again, look across. This is where people farmed across here. This is where the priestly class lived, apparently, and managed the site. Site, again, was abandoned about 1275. Probably the result of that decades-long drought that affected here, too. Again, reoccupied for a short time. And we know that it was reoccupied at least 1540 because there is one petroglyph of a man on a horse. And there are no horses before 1540. So somebody in that time period saw that and put it on the petroglyph wall. So it's an interesting thing. There is wildlife around, aside from coyotes. Obviously, coyotes are eating something. This guy was literally about, maybe a foot from the edge of a 200-foot fall. Didn't seem to mind, and didn't seem to mind us being there. You see, he's paying attention. But I'm not sure if we had gone any closer where we would have jumped to. But they are there. Coyotes were wandering around. This is a desert cottontail. There are a lot of birds in the area. And there was actually a bear warning while we were there. It's the first bear they've seen in the valley in 35 years. And so it was interesting. There was a constant mountain lion warning. We did not see or hear any of them, but they're undoubtedly there as well. So there is wildlife here. So the desert does live. And, of course, there are lots of lizards. Okay? And similar promise to this guy. You'll be an alligator by the time I'm done with you, buddy. And, so there he is. This is actually an eared lizard. You can see the ear with them. From here, we went to Bandelier. This is kind of the last cliff dwelling that we went to. Bandelier is a very, very different site. Doesn't look it at the outset, but this is not sedimentary rock. This is what's called tuff, T-U-F-F. This is volcanic ash, because right next to this is Valles Calderas, which is an ancient volcano, and an enormous one. And over the hundreds of thousands of years of the eruptions of Valles Caldera, this huge layer of volcanic ash was put down and then compressed as more and more layers were put on it. And then, of course, eroded by the water action here. And the tuff itself is very soft. You pick it up and it doesn't quite crumble, but it doesn't take much with your fingernail. You can scratch right through it. But it's strong enough to be a building material. But here, the people not only built villages away from the side of the wall, they also built them into the side of the wall and also lived in the caves. Some of them were expanded. Some of them would have a wall in front of them. Some of them were just lived in as they were. And the neat thing here is you can go in them. Okay, this site was rebuilt mostly through the WPA, CCC in the 30s and 40s. And you can actually go in a lot of these sites, which is really kind of neat. You can't do that in most others. But again, you can see there is the same D-shaped village here. Same thing. This is contemporaneous. Reached its peak around 1,000 or so. But we're actually in one of the cave dwellings here looking out at this one. This is really a beautiful park as well. There is a permanent stream that runs through this one. This is not very far from Los Alamos. Okay, so there is civilization nearby. This is an easy day visit from Santa Fe, but this beautiful park as well. So it's really a nice place. And again, there are petroglyphs everywhere. This is probably a turkey, and this is the symbol of the park. But these at one time were actually the back walls of people's houses. And so this was the living room art. Okay, or perhaps the refrigerator art, whatever. Okay, but this was, and there's all sorts of stuff on this. This is a dog of some sort, so it's not unusual today. Portraits of your dog, well, so did they, and all sorts of interesting critters. Same things with spirals, the strange-looking people, the same splayed figures that you see, and some of the patterns, particularly sort of those mountain-like patterns that still show up. In native blanketry, particularly in native weaving, are on the back walls of a lot of these houses. So that's an ancient symbol of some sort that has carried on. This is also a bird sanctuary. That's a red-shafted flicker. For those of you that are bird people, I am, so you're going to be subject to a picture or two. We have them here too, but ours are yellow-shafted. Okay, they're not red. Unfortunately, as we were driving to Mesa Verde, we hit a yellow-shafted flicker, flew right in front of us, couldn't avoid it, and all that. When we got to Mesa Verde, apparently there were still a couple feathers in the grill of the car that had fallen out, and two of the naturalists, they come by every night and tell you that, make sure that your food is in, and watch out for bears and stuff like that. And this guy saw it, he says, yellow-shafted flicker feathers! There's a yellow-shafted flicker here! And I really felt like I said, no, I hit one about 100 miles north of here, sorry. And we should have let him have his moment and occupy him the rest of the summer. But it's a really beautiful park as well. And if you're in the Santa Fe area, definitely go out to Bandelier. It's a lot of fun. And again, just nice. It's an older park, which is really interesting. It had been a privately held resort for many, many years. And then it got turned over to the Park Service in the 30s. So it got that really nice older park feel to it. Not heavily visited. But it's just a really, really nice park. And it is next to one of the most gorgeous places I have ever seen, the Valles Caldera, which is the old volcano there. I've never seen a sign like this before, but there were hundreds of prairie dogs everywhere. And they're actually being studied. There's a group there from the University of Kansas studying the prairie dogs. So, of course, I went out to ask them, why are you studying them? What are you looking at? They're actually studying disease vectors. Prairie dogs carry plague. And there are about 9 cases of plague in the United States every year. Almost all of them are on Indian reservations where there are prairie dogs and certain types of mice. And because of the large number of prairie dogs here, they're actually studying the disease vectors that come out of the prairie dog community. And they're looking at also the socialization and all that kind of stuff. And even though they're a potential source of plague, God, are they cute? They just are. They get up. They're all over the place in the valley. This is a huge place. The floor of the caldera is about 20 miles in diameter. So this is an enormous place. And the rim mountains that you see are the edge of the volcano. And then there are several small mountains and hills inside that plains area that are old vents. Where some are cinder cones. Where there have been prior eruptions, and here's some more of them. And they whistle and they chirp and they're cute, so it's kind of nice to see them. But this is just absolutely gorgeous land. This is actually the floor of the peak, actually the crest of the volcano. The now current volcanism is way, way underground. This is not an active site at all, but it has potential, of course. There are several streams that run through it that are home to a very unique type of trout that got trapped up there at some point, and so you can fish, but you have to put it back. But it's just gorgeous. There are still 2 working ranches in here. If any of you are familiar with the Netflix series Longmire, it's filmed here. And his house is actually one of the ranger houses that's on the site. But it's just spectacular land. You can go to the visitor center, which is about 2 miles in, but then they only allow 35 cars a day into the backcountry. We had originally planned on, we actually stopped here on our way to Santa Fe on our way to Carlsbad, but we had originally planned on going on the next Friday, and found out that elk season opened on that Friday. So the ranger said, you might want to come tomorrow, because they do cull the herd. The second largest herd in New Mexico of elk is in the caldera, and they do have to be culled out through hunting. So we went on Tuesday instead. Wonderful trails. Nobody on them, of course, because they only allow 35 cars, and most of them were fishermen. So the trails were just spectacular. We didn't get there. 18 trails, up to 18 miles long. And so you can spend a lot of time in this place, but it's just absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous land. And what was really interesting, again, just striking. I'd move here tomorrow, if they'd let me. It was interesting. We got there about 8 o'clock in the morning, and you can see prairie dogs, and every now and then you'd see a hawk fly over. But you'd think with that many prairie dogs, there ought to be a lot of predators, and there are. But it was like a bell went off at 3:30, and all of a sudden all the predators were out, because we saw none until then. And then all of a sudden there are coyotes everywhere, there are hawks everywhere, and so I just stopped and took a picture of this one. She was absolutely unafraid of us, or he, and I was not using. I think it's a she because it looks pregnant to me, but she was, 40 feet away from us at tops, and just kind of stared at us as we're staring at her. But it was interesting how they all came out. Then we saw something really interesting. We turned a corner about 2.5 miles or so from the visitor center, and I liked this when I was a passenger. Carl was driving. The color of this coyote just struck me. He said, I want to get out and get a picture of this one. So I kind of jumped out of the car, and this one was there. And then Carl had binoculars. He said, oh, Tom, look, there's another one off to the left. So I look, and sure enough, there's a second coyote. And as I'm looking at that, he says, oh, there's another one really low in the ground off to the right. And so I'm looking, I don't see it. And then all of a sudden, there it is. It's not a coyote, it's a badger. And what we were watching without realizing it right away was what's called a symbiotic hunt. The badger was actually digging out prairie dogs. And the coyotes were sort of circling the badger, staying a very respectful. Badgers are dangerous animals. They never got closer than about 4 feet. But what would happen is the badger would dig down, and all of a sudden a prairie dog would pop up out of their escape tunnel somewhere, and the coyotes would grab it, and then move away. And so it was really interesting to see. When we went to the rangers afterwards, we're excited. We say, oh boy, we saw this thing. And the naturalist there told us, so you've seen something extremely unusual, that a lot of people don't see that. And then she told us an interesting story. She went to a convention of national park naturalists, and with this story said, I've seen this hunt between coyotes and badgers. And she was told by all the other naturalists there, that never happens. You didn't really see that. She had it on film. So it's like, yes, I have seen that. So, and we have seen it also. It's the first badger I've ever seen in the wild, so that was really exciting. But again, yet another predator in this area. But just an absolutely stunning area. Lots of birds. I just like this picture, so I'm subjecting you to it. But this happened to be a red-tailed hawk. There are a lot of Swainson's hawks as well. What I found interesting is there are a lot of American kestrels, which we also have here. They're sort of the robin-sized hawks that you often see sitting on wires. They're almost twice the size in the caldera. I first thought they were either merlins or perhaps falcons of some sort, but on close look, they were kestrels, but they were literally twice the size of the ones here, so apparently pretty well fed, if not. On our way down to the southern end, to White Sands and all that, you have to stop in Hatch, New Mexico. It is the chili capital of the United States. And these are chilies. These are called ristras. They are literally ropes of chili, and you buy them by the foot. And this was a gas station, so I mean they're everywhere in Hatch. It has chilies all over it. And they'll actually roast them right there for you. It's like the best smelling town in America because everybody has a roaster in front, anybody that sells them. And they'll ask you right there, you want them roasted, and they'll roast them right there for you. And they really are good. They're not all hot either, but everything in every place we went that has New Mexico, they're very distinct. It's not Mexican cuisine, it is New Mexican cuisine. Okay? And it all has Hatch chilies in it, and they're really good. And you can find them. Wegmans carries them. So don't buy cheap imitation brands, buy Hatch chili. It's a brand as well. And these are the fields of chilies, miles of them in this place. So we did stop at Hatch just to see the chilies and stuff. It was fun. But then we were actually headed to White Sands, which is a national park. And White Sands is a fascinating area. Of course, this is the missile testing area, and it does close when they're firing missiles, which is probably a good thing. It doesn't happen they were not. We actually stayed, Carl's retired Air Force, so we actually got to stay at Holloman Air Force Base, which borders this. So it's kind of a neat place to stay. But the White Sands are actually fairly new geologically. They're only about 7,000 years old. And they're formed in a very interesting way. The mountains nearby are full of gypsum, which is water soluble. And in the snow melts particularly, that leaches out of the mountains into these seasonal ponds that are at the edge of the White Sands area. And then, of course, the season dries up. Gypsum doesn't really have a lot of weight to it, so it decays into a sand-like quality, and it's very light. And then gets carried by the winds, creating these huge dunes for about 40 square miles of them. It's a really large site. And some of them, the further away you get from the alkali beds, the more vegetation you see that stops the dunes. So it's really intriguing. This is White Sands. And it's really interesting. The sand is actually held in place because the water table is almost at the surface here. It's within 2 feet of the surface. So the bottom layer of sand is actually damp and gets very hard in the sun. Whereas this top layer is quite soft. So it sort of slides across that upper barrier. And again, the closer you are to the origin, the less vegetation there is, so those dunes are moving constantly. One of the problems, Alamogordo is very nearby. It is a growing community, and they're tapping into the same groundwater. So there's a real fear that as the town grows, the groundwater will give way and this will disappear. And there is some evidence that that's actually already happening. The constant winds shift the dunes. This is the road. They have to plow the road every day. It looked like home. Exactly like the plow that comes down my street most of the year, plowing the sand out of the way. But they have to do that about twice a day in order to keep the road from being drifted over. And again, you can see the mountains. You can actually see the light color back here. That's actually the gypsum layer. And that's what leaches down into the sands area. Now, this is an earless lizard. He was not willing to pose very well, so I had to sneak up on him. But I want you to notice the color. Now, he's living amongst the vegetation, so he's got the natural color. This is the exact same lizard living out in the White Sands. Okay, so this has been a laboratory for natural selection evolution. Lighter colored critters live. Anything dark gets picked off easily, and we saw that. There are a lot of grasshoppers out when we hiked. They didn't last long unless they were also that very, very light color. So it's a case of natural selection at work within 7,000 years, which again is very, very quick in ecological time. spectacular area, just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful area. Okay, and you're looking west in this case. Okay, yeah, isn't that gorgeous? It does. It looks like snow. Okay, but it doesn't feel like snow. So it's nice. Again, just beautiful land. But what was really intriguing, again, this is an area where the water table is quite close. This is wind rippling that you see, and then the dunes as you go out, just spectacular. Every now and then, when you're out in the main White Sands area, you'll see these towers with trees on them, and these are cottonwoods. And what's happened is a dune apparently has stopped there long enough for some cottonwood seeds to actually take root. And they'll actually extend their roots down 40 feet. God bless you, to get to the water site. And then when the dune moves on, this area is very stable. So there are these interesting towers. One of the things I found interesting, there's a unique subspecies of porcupine that lives only in White Sands. We usually associate porcupines with northern woods. But for some reason, this group lives. We didn't see any. We saw some tracks. But they apparently live here, and this is where a lot of critters will live in this area as well. The sand is actually quite cool. When we got there in the evening, and there was a ranger program on, so we kind of hung around. And the ranger was there in full ranger regalia and barefoot. And so he asked her, he said, "What's with the, are you making a point or something?" He said, "Well, take your shoes off and find out." The sand was absolutely cool and incredibly soft. And it was actually easier to walk around barefoot than in your hiking boots. And so when we took it, you see one of our footprints here. There's a 6-mile hike that you can take through the dunes. You have to keep, there are big orange posts. And you have to keep them in sight, because if you wander off, it all looks like white sand. And you must have a working cell phone, and they check before you go to make sure it's working, because people do get lost out there, or sandstorms come up and they get lost. But we found it actually easier to walk barefoot, so we did this hike barefoot for 6 miles, and it was 100 degrees outside, but the sand was nice. Not like I grew up on Long Island, you'd be burning your feet on the sand. Not at all. It was cool, comfortable. And it was literally like walking on talcum powder. It was a wonderful hike and a nice place. We went across the mountains to the Carlsbad Caverns, and of course everybody wants to go underground, as you should. But the area above Carlsbad is spectacular. Great hiking up there. It's very mountainous. This was in that inland sea also. This was a reef. At one time, that was almost 100 miles long and several hundred feet tall. So this is all limestone in here, which is why there are caverns there. There are literally hundreds of caverns in this area. The longest one that they found so far is 150 miles long, and they're not to the end of it yet. It's a brand, they've only discovered it in the 1980s. They're only allowed to go down, they told us, 9 days at a time, because it's also a very sensitive ecological area. So I looked at the ranger who told me that, and I said, now, all right, 150 miles you've been back, 9 days, carry in, carry out. Do the math. Okay, you are not going 150 miles back in 4.5 days. Okay, that's not happening. So you kind of got to get one of these shuffling fees. So, well, some of us get to go longer. Okay, so yes, absolutely. But one of the new caves that they do not tell you where it is, you might come across it. It's guarded. Has a type of microbe in it that may hold a cure for cancer. So they're very protective of that site. There's a lot of experimentation going on in that site and in that cave. So there's some really, really exciting stuff going on there. There are, of course, all kinds of interesting critters. This guy was about 5 inches long, just kind of moseying around the road. Who's going to bother him? Okay, so there he is. And this mule deer followed us. I'm not sure if it was expected to be fed or not. But they were all over the place. And we could not get, we had planned several surface hikes. And we could not get permission to do them because, again, by 10 o'clock in the morning, it was already 105 degrees. Again, they couldn't have stopped us. But, courtesy was you didn't do that. So we spent more time underground, which was really cool. The second day we went underground, we got down to the caverns. We were there by ourselves, just the two of us and about 5 rangers. So we had this incredible private tour of Carlsbad Caverns. It was absolutely wonderful. This is the entrance to the cave. It's about 80 feet down. The elevator was not working, which we weren't going to take anyway. It is 79 stories down to the bottom of the cave. So you go down 79 stories, and of course you have to come up 79 stories. So it was really quite a hike, and you're up 7,000 feet. But the original guy that discovered it, natives did find this. You can't see it in this picture. There actually is some native artwork on a wall right underneath here. And there were some, you're not supposed to know this, so you can't ever say anything about this, because the ranger was very like, there were some burials found in here. Okay, that's very hush-hush information, apparently. But you do go down, and it's spectacular. This is where the bats come out at night. 500,000 bats will come out of this. This may be 75 feet across. So they actually come out, and then to build speed, they swirl. And so there's this like tornado of bats coming out. It lasts for hours. And it was just spectacular. You don't see them when you're down there. You can go back quite a ways. They say that there's a bat, a sort of a separate bat cave off, but the nearest bats that they found are about 4.5 miles in. So they do come quite a long way out. Nobody knows what starts them off, but they all come out. Now, this is a very different cave. Caves here, like go to Howe Caverns or Mammoth Caves, Luray Caverns down in Virginia, they're all formed by water action. Underground streams have cut this. This is formed by sulfuric acid. The gaps in here, whatever those microbes are, exhale sulfur, which combines with the water. And then, so it's sulfuric acid that has made the chambers. And then leaching water from above is still what makes the features. So you have stalactites, stalagmites, and then these are called drapes, and they are all over the place. The rooms are absolutely enormous. Somebody asked me yesterday, I did this program yesterday too, somebody asked me, well, compared to Howe Caverns, how big is this? You could probably fit 500 or 600 Howe Caverns inside this. The main chamber that you go into is 250 feet tall and over 6 acres of floor space. And that leads, there's a cave above it that they've only been able to get into for about the last 7 years. So far, they've gone back 5 miles in that one. And again, you can go back 140 miles from that cave through other chambers. This is another example of drapes. It's not nearly this bright. Cameras, of course, suck in light. So I wasn't able to really do what I wanted to do here. And I didn't have a tripod down there, so I couldn't take the long exposures. These are called straws or pipes. And they hang all over the place. Okay, some of these are literally 1,000 years old. They don't grow very fast, maybe 1/8 of an inch a year in a really good year. And, of course, there's some years where they don't grow at all. But they're all over the place. Some of these spires are 80 feet tall. Just incredible stuff. And again, the known cave is 142 miles. That's just spectacular. These are called the Giant's Towers. This one was about 65 feet high. They think it's a minimum of 60,000 years old. Maybe as old as 100,000 years old. So it's really spectacular stuff. Great sight. And again, lots of neat birds above. So you don't just go underground. There's a lot of neat stuff happening above ground too. And one of them is bat flight. We were told the bat flight was scheduled for 7 o'clock. Nobody told the bats that. So we were told get there about 6:15. So we got there at 6:15, and there was a young woman ranger who was about to give a program, and she had said about 3 words when the first bat showed up. And as soon as the first bat shows up, everything is off. You are not allowed to take photographs. You're not allowed to have your cell phone. You're not allowed to have any type of electronic device. And they actually did arrest a guy who was trying to be clever with his cell phone and stuff like that, because it interrupts the bat's natural echolocation system. And but it's unbelievable. You smell it first. It smells like mice. All of a sudden, the smell comes in, and within a matter of seconds, the bats come. And then you are allowed to go up in the parking lot and take pictures. And it was a little too dark. There was a red-tailed hawk working the bat. He was literally, you'd hear it. He'd go swooping through, he'd just whack, and a bat would fall, and he'd go down and grab it. And then he'd fly off, come back a few minutes later, get another one. But the bats, interestingly enough, form like a wall. Because, again, there are 500,000 of them. The prevailing wind is from the south here. So harmful insects coming up from Mexico don't make it past the wall of bats. So the agriculture just to the north of this benefits tremendously from the bats that are here. Things you don't think about. And just, again, hundreds of thousands of them. It's such a spectacular sight. And it goes well into dark. I asked them, well, they all obviously have to come back. Does anybody watch? By dawn, they're all back. So there really isn't a counterpart to watch in the morning, which is neat. Not all the creatures are kind of friendly or cute. This is 7 inch. My flash is about 7 inches. So that's a centipede. They are poisonous. Don't touch them. They grow up to about literally 15, 16 inches. They live in the cave too, unfortunately. So kind of interesting. We did do one of the candlelight tours, and I strongly recommend that. If you go there, it was fun. First of all, the ranger was a lot of fun, but it's such a different experience. They limit it to 10 people, and you go about 2.5 miles through one of the side caverns. And again, everybody just has this candle in these. It is just a spectacular sight. And at one point, like all caves, they shut out all the lights. You put out all the candles, and you're there in just absolute pitch dark. They let you sit there for a couple minutes, and then they light a single candle. And it is amazing how much light a single candle gives off, when you're in an environment like this. So it's just such a cool thing to do. Very quickly, we went to the Guadalupe Mountains as well. They're actually an extension of the same mountains that Carlsbad Caverns is. It's also part of that reef. But here we did surface hiking. There are some caves here, but they're not open. This is our home for 17 days. It was a lot of fun, but like I said, the ground gets a little hard after a while. But the campsites here were just absolutely gorgeous. They were wonderful campsites. But here you're there for the mountains, and this is what's left of the reef. Again, the erosion and the talus slopes here, and the surface hiking was just outstanding. This is a beautiful, rugged area, but great hikes. The climb to the highest point in Texas, we didn't do that. It seems like a lot. It's really not. It was about an 800-foot hike because Texas doesn't have very many high spots. And you're already up about 7,000 feet. But it was just absolutely gorgeous. This is with our target. This is called the Devil's Hallway. And it was just an excellent hike, about 2.5 miles back, so 5-mile round trip. We did have to say that we would be back by 10 in the morning because, again, it was about 105 degrees by 10 o'clock. So we got on the trail about 7. And it wasn't necessarily an easy hike either. I mean, it looks like a nice flat trail and so forth. Not really. It was probably on a 5 level, probably a 3. Maybe if you weren't a seasoned hiker, maybe a 4. So it was because this is what you're walking through. You're walking down a dry riverbed. But it was just gorgeous country, just absolutely gorgeous country. This is one of the on the way. And this looks like it's really easy. It was not. These were narrow, and they were tilted the wrong way. So I actually came across this way and down. Carl was a little more adventurous, but it took him almost 15 minutes to make it down this staircase. So it was interesting. Going up wasn't quite as hard, but it was a great hike. And this is closed part of the year because it floods during the dry off. This hawk came right at us, which was really kind of neat. We were at a place called Rattlesnake Springs, which is actually part of Carlsbad Park, about halfway between the two parks. And I don't know what we did to offend him, but he swung right at us. So I said, okay, you're going to do that. I'm going to take your picture. And so this is Swainson's hawk. Came right out. We don't have them here in the east. And if you look closely, I think it's the same mule deer that followed us to the south end of the park. We're not exactly sure, but it was just a beautiful site, very low impact site. There were 20 campsites in the entire park. That's it, and under visit, nice visitor center, very dedicated volunteers in this place. It was a lot of fun. We did go back to Santa Fe, which we had planned. We were going to fly out of Santa Fe originally, but now Carl and Katrina live there. So we visited there. It was a lot of fun. I learned something interesting about aspens. When you see a grove of aspens like this, they share a single root system. They actually clone, sort of like lilacs do here. So if there's any damage to the root system anywhere, all of them are affected, which is why they're so passionate about protecting these aspen fields in the high mountains. This is up above. It's literally 20 minutes from Santa Fe, and all of a sudden you're up 12,000 feet. The U.S. actually owns a ski resort up there, and this was up there looking over the mountains. And again, you can see the smoke from the California fires here as well. Santa Fe City is down about over here, but you can see again how striking the water is. You don't have a whole lot of water down here. Got a lot more of it up here in the mountains. So, and Valle Calderas would be actually over these mountains over this way. So just a beautiful, beautiful area. There are lots of really good places to eat in Santa Fe. It's really a neat city. Very low. The tallest building is 6 stories tall, and it's the state office building. Everything else is 1 or 2 stories. It's not a large city at all. I think 30,000, 40,000 people maybe. but it's a very arty community. For one, lots of neat shops and things like that. Really, really nice Indian market that was fun to go to. And if you do go to the Blue Corn Cafe, the dark beers are much better than the light beers. I'm not a huge beer drinker, but the dark beers are really good. And this was the send-off the night before I left. This is called Virga. We get this here occasionally. But a lot of it's because it's so dry. A lot of the rain doesn't hit the ground, but it does rain. And of course, the sunset coming through, just spectacular. It was a great trip. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. Headed to London next Sunday, so I'll come back with another trip for you. Thank you, everybody.